The last thing Olivia Foster needed was a flat tire in the middle of nowhere. Rain pelted against her windshield as she gripped the steering wheel, her heart sinking as her car wobbled to a stop on the side of the lonely highway. She exhaled sharply, brushing damp strands of hair from her face. Could this day get any worse? She had been on her way to a crucial job interview, one that could finally pull her out of the financial mess she was drowning in. But now she was stranded with no spare tire, no roadside assistance, and no time to waste. A pair of headlights cut through the storm, slowing as the sleek black car approached. Olivia tensed. Her mother had always warned her about accepting help from strangers, especially on desolate roads. But as the window rolled down and a deep, velvety voice spoke, she found herself momentarily stunned. "Need some help?" Standing beside the luxury car was a man who looked like he had just stepped off the cover of a high-end business magazine. His crisp white shirt clung to his broad shoulders, slightly damp from the rain, and his dark hair was effortlessly tousled. His piercing blue eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her breath hitch. Yeah," Olivia stammered, mentally scolding herself for sounding so flustered. "Flat tire. And no spare." The man glanced at her car and let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "You really are having a rough day. You have no idea," she muttered, crossing her arms. He extended his hand. "I'm Nathaniel Pierce." She hesitated before shaking it. His grip was firm, warm despite the cold rain. "Olivia Foster." "Well, Olivia," he said, stepping back. "Let's get you back on the road." She frowned. "You have a spare that fits." He smirked. No, smiled. She corrected herself before gesturing to his car. "Not exactly. But I can give you a ride wherever you need to go." Olivia hesitated. Was she really about to get into a car with a stranger? But the rain was relentless. Her interview was in less than an hour, and there was no way she could fix the tire herself. "All right," she finally said, grabbing her purse. "But just to be clear, if you turn out to be a serial killer, I will fight back." Nathaniel chuckled, opening the passenger door for her. "Duly noted." As she slid into the plush leather seat, the scent of expensive cologne filled the space. This wasn't just any car, it was a car that screamed wealth. The kind of wealth Olivia had never encountered up close. "So, where to?" Nathaniel asked as he pulled back onto the road. She gave him the address of the office building downtown. He raised an eyebrow. "Big meeting?" "Job interview," she admitted, "and I'm already running late." Nathaniel tapped his fingers against the wheel, thinking. Then, without warning, he pressed down on the gas and the car surged forward. Olivia's eyes widened. "Are you seriously speeding?" "You said you're late," he replied smoothly. "I'm just making sure you don't miss your chance." She clutched the seat as the city lights came into view faster than she expected. Despite herself, she couldn't help but laugh. "You're insane," he grinned. "I prefer efficient." Minutes later, he pulled up in front of the towering office building. Olivia barely had time to register her shock at the speed of the journey before Nathaniel was stepping out and opening her door. "Go," he said. "Knock them dead." She hesitated, then looked up at him. "Thank you, Nathaniel." He tilted his head. "You can thank me by letting me know how it goes." Before she could respond, a honking car reminded her that she had no time to waste. With one last glance at the mysterious man who had come to her rescue, she hurried inside, not realizing that this chance encounter was only the beginning of something far greater. Olivia rushed into the towering office building, her shoes clicking against the polished marble floor as she weaved through the bustling lobby. The receptionist barely glanced up from her screen when Olivia gasped out her name, motioning toward the elevators with a curt nod. She squeezed into the next available one, pressing the button for the 24th floor with trembling fingers. Her pulse pounded in her ears as the elevator ascended, her wet clothes clinging uncomfortably to her skin. This interview meant everything. It was a position at Lancaster & Co., one of the most prestigious marketing firms in the city. The thought of making a real salary, escaping the constant stress of overdue bills, was the only thing keeping her upright. The doors slid open, and she stepped into the sleek, modern office space. A woman with sharp cheekbones and an even sharper stare glanced up from behind the reception desk. Olivia Foster. Yes, Olivia managed, trying to catch her breath while smoothing her damp blouse. The woman pursed her lips. You're late. Olivia opened her mouth to explain, but the woman was already gesturing toward a glass-walled conference room. They're waiting for you. Swallowing hard, Olivia straightened her shoulders and stepped inside. 3 executives sat at the long table, their expressions unreadable. A gray-haired man at the head of the table folded his hands together. Miss Foster, you're 15 minutes late. I sincerely apologize, she said, forcing herself to maintain eye contact. There was an unexpected delay, but I'm here now and ready to discuss how I can contribute to Lancaster & Co. One of the women exchanged a glance with her colleague. Let's hope your ideas are more punctual than you are. The next 30 minutes were a blur of rapid-fire questions, challenges to her portfolio, and scrutinizing stares. Olivia answered each one with as much composure as she could muster, drawing from every ounce of experience and sheer determination she had. By the time she walked out, she had no idea if she had impressed them or humiliated herself. She barely noticed the rain had stopped when she stepped outside. What she did notice, however, was the sleek black car idling at the curb. Her brow furrowed in confusion as the tinted window rolled down, revealing Nathaniel Pierce in the driver's seat. How'd it go? He asked, his tone light but his gaze searching. Olivia blinked. What are you still doing here? He shrugged. Figured you might need a ride back. She hesitated. The sensible thing would be to decline, call a friend, or take the subway. But as exhaustion set in, the thought of sinking into that ridiculously comfortable passenger seat again was too tempting to resist. Wordlessly, she climbed in. Nathaniel pulled back into traffic, glancing at her. So, she sighed. Honestly, I have no idea. They were tough. I did my best, but... She trailed off, staring out the window. You'll get it, he said, his confidence in her unsettling. She let out a short laugh. You don't even know me. Maybe not, he admitted, but I know determination when I see it. Olivia turned to him, studying him for the first time without the urgency of a crisis pressing down on her. He wasn't just wealthy, he carried himself with the easy assurance of someone who was used to control, to getting what he wanted. There was something about him that felt deliberate, like every move he made was calculated. Who are you really? She asked, narrowing her eyes. You drive a car that costs more than most people's houses. You have the confidence of a CEO, and yet you were just casually driving down a deserted highway when I needed help, Nathaniel smirked. You make it sound suspicious. Is it? He was silent for a moment, then turned onto a quieter street. Let's just say I run a business. A few, actually. A few. She repeated, raising an eyebrow. What kind of businesses? He tapped his fingers against the steering wheel. Investments, acquisitions, some tech, some real estate. I like finding potential in things that others overlook. The way he said it sent a shiver down her spine, though she couldn't tell if it was intrigue or warning. And what do you want in return? She asked. His smirk deepened. Results. The word hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. They drove in silence for a while, the city lights flickering across the windshield. Where am I taking you? He finally asked. Olivia hesitated. Her apartment was small, cramped, with flickering lights and a temperamental plumbing system. It felt absurd to have come from the gleaming office of Lancaster & Co. and be dropped off at a place that constantly smelled like her neighbor's burnt toast. Just. Downtown is fine, she said vaguely. Nathaniel didn't press. Instead, he pulled up at a quiet cafe with warm lights spilling onto the sidewalk. Come have coffee with me, he said. It wasn't a question. She should say no. She should thank him, walk away, and never see him again. Instead, she heard herself say, okay. As they stepped inside, Olivia had the distinct feeling that she had just agreed to something far more than a simple cup of coffee. The scent of roasted coffee beans and freshly baked pastries enveloped Olivia as she stepped inside the cafe. The space was warm and inviting, with vintage pendant lights casting a golden glow over the dark wooden tables. A soft hum of conversation filled the air, punctuated by the occasional hiss of the espresso machine. Nathaniel led her to a secluded corner booth, his movements smooth and assured, as if he was accustomed to commanding space wherever he went. Olivia followed, acutely aware of the stark contrast between them, her damp clothes clinging uncomfortably while he looked effortlessly composed, as if the rain hadn't touched him at all. A barista approached, and Nathaniel ordered without hesitation. Olivia barely registered his choice, too wrapped up in the surreal nature of her evening. When the barista turned to her, she quickly requested a cappuccino, suddenly self-conscious under Nathaniel's unwavering gaze. As soon as the barista left, Olivia leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "So, tell me something," she said, studying him. "You're clearly not the kind of guy who just goes around offering strangers rides in the middle of nowhere. Why did you stop?" Nathaniel's lips curled slightly, but the amusement didn't quite reach his eyes this time. "I was in the right place at the right time." "That's not an answer," she countered. He exhaled, drumming his fingers lightly against the table. "Let's just say I don't believe in coincidences. When I see something worth my time, I don't ignore it." Her stomach flipped at the weight of his words, though she wasn't sure if it was intrigue or caution that made her pulse quicken. "That's a very convenient philosophy for someone who clearly has the resources to act on impulse," she noted. Nathaniel tilted his head slightly. "And you? Do you ignore opportunities when they present themselves?" Olivia hesitated, caught off guard by the shift in conversation. "I don't have the luxury to take risks just because they seem interesting," she admitted. "I have to be practical." "Practical," he repeated as if testing the word. "That's a useful trait. But sometimes, practicality keeps people from realizing their full potential." Before she could respond, the barista returned with their drinks. Nathaniel lifted his espresso with the ease of a man accustomed to fine things, but Olivia barely touched hers, her mind preoccupied with his words. "What is it you do exactly?" she asked, watching him carefully. "You said investments, acquisitions, but that's vague." A ghost of a smirk tugged at his lips. "I find businesses that are struggling, overlooked, undervalued, and I make them successful. By buying them, by reshaping them," he corrected, "steering them in the right direction." She considered that. "So you take control." He met her gaze evenly. "I make things work." There was something both compelling and unsettling about the way he said it. "And what happens when something doesn't work?" she challenged. His expression didn't falter. "Everything can work if you know how to handle it." Olivia sat back, fingers curling around her cup. "That sounds dangerously close to arrogance." Nathaniel chuckled, but there was a sharpness behind it. "Confidence, there's a difference." She wasn't sure she agreed. But before she could push further, he changed the subject. "What's your goal, Olivia?" he asked, his tone shifting into something quieter, more deliberate. She blinked. "My goal? Yes." "Where do you want to be in 5 years?" The question caught her off guard. She had been so focused on immediate survival, on making rent, on getting the job at Lancaster & Co., that she hadn't allowed herself to think that far ahead in a long time. "I want stability," she said finally. "A career I can rely on." Something that lets me breathe without constantly worrying about whether I can afford to. Nathaniel nodded, as if he had expected that answer. And if you didn't have to worry about money? Olivia frowned. That's not my reality. But if it were, she hesitated, then exhaled. I'd create something of my own, a business maybe, I don't know. I've always had ideas, but ideas don't pay the bills. Nathaniel studied her, his gaze sharp, assessing. Maybe not, but execution does. A beat of silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant clatter of cups and quiet murmurs from other tables. You think I should just drop everything and chase some fantasy? She asked. I think you should recognize your own potential, he said simply. The intensity of his words unsettled her, not because they were untrue, but because a small, hidden part of her wanted to believe them. She set her cup down, suddenly feeling exposed. Why does this matter to you? Nathaniel leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable. Because I recognize something in you, Olivia. A shiver ran through her, but she wasn't sure if it was from his words or the way he said them. Before she could respond, his phone buzzed against the table. He barely glanced at the screen before silencing it. I should get going, he said, standing smoothly. Olivia followed suit, still processing everything. As they stepped outside, the city felt quieter, the streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement. I meant what I said, Nathaniel murmured. Let me know how the job goes. She nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed he actually expected her to. As he walked toward his car, she turned in the opposite direction, her thoughts a tangled mess. She had gone into that cafe expecting nothing more than a drink with a stranger. But she left with the unsettling feeling that her life was now on an entirely different course. The following morning, Olivia sat at her small kitchen table, staring at her phone. The email from Lancaster & Co. sat unopened in her inbox, its subject line a vague but ominous regarding your application. She exhaled slowly, her fingers hovering over the screen. If they had rejected her, she'd rather not start her day with that disappointment. But waiting wouldn't change the outcome. With a deep breath, she tapped the email open. Dear Miss Foster, we appreciate your time and interest in Lancaster & Co. After careful consideration, we would like to offer you the position of Junior Marketing Associate. Please find the attached documents outlining the terms of your employment. Her pulse kicked up. They had chosen her. A relieved laugh escaped her as she skimmed the details. The salary wasn't extravagant, but it was steady, enough to give her a sense of security she hadn't felt in a long time. A knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. She frowned. No one ever visited her unannounced. Rising, she crossed the small apartment and opened the door. Nathaniel Pierce stood on the other side. For a moment, Olivia was too stunned to react. He was dressed in a tailored suit, dark and crisp, looking entirely out of place in the narrow hallway of her apartment complex. His gaze swept over her, taking in her oversized sweater and loose ponytail, but if he had any thoughts about it, he kept them to himself. How do you know where I live? She asked, crossing her arms. Nathaniel leaned casually against the doorframe, his expression unreadable. I have my ways. The answer should have bothered her, but she had the distinct feeling that Nathaniel was the kind of man who always got what he wanted, and information was no exception. I assume you got the job, he said. She studied him, debating whether to keep him guessing, but there was no point. I did. His mouth curved slightly as if he had expected nothing less. Good. Now let's talk about what's next. Olivia scoffed. What's next? I just got the job, Nathaniel. That is what's next. You're thinking too small, he said smoothly. Lancaster & Co. is a stepping stone. If you're going to succeed, you need to think beyond a paycheck. She narrowed her eyes. Not everyone has the luxury of skipping steps. Maybe, he conceded, but the right connections can make steps unnecessary. Olivia let out a short laugh, shaking her head. Is that why you're here, to offer me a connection? Nathaniel's gaze didn't waver. I'm here to make a proposal. A flicker of suspicion crept in. What kind of proposal? He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his presence instantly overwhelming the small space. Olivia closed the door, watching as he glanced around, his sharp eyes taking in the modest furnishings. I have a business venture in the works, he said finally, turning back to her. It's a project that requires someone with fresh insight, someone sharp. I think you could be useful. She folded her arms. You don't even know what I'm capable of. I know enough, Nathaniel countered. I know you're ambitious. I know you don't like being underestimated, and I know you're not satisfied with just getting by. His words struck a nerve, but Olivia refused to let it show. And what would this venture involve? Nathaniel studied her for a beat before answering. I'm acquiring a company that's been struggling for years. It has potential, but it's been mismanaged. I need someone who understands branding, someone who can see beyond what's on paper. She frowned. And you think that's me? I think you have instincts that could be valuable, Nathaniel said simply, and I think you deserve more than what Lancaster & Co. is offering you. Olivia didn't know whether to be flattered or irritated. So you're asking me to leave a job I just got for something that may or may not work? Nathaniel's expression didn't change. I'm asking you to consider an opportunity that could change everything. She exhaled sharply, running a hand through her hair. I don't even know what company you're talking about. I'll give you the details if you're interested, he said. But I don't waste time convincing people who don't see their own potential. His words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Olivia hesitated. The logical part of her screamed to decline. She had worked too hard for this job to gamble it away on a venture she knew nothing about. But another part of her, a quieter, more reckless part, whispered that this was the kind of moment that defined people. She looked at Nathaniel, at the unwavering confidence in his stance. He wasn't asking, he was offering, and the choice was hers. Olivia paced her apartment long after Nathaniel had left, his words echoing in her mind. The offer was outrageous. She had just secured a stable job, a step toward the life she had been working so hard to build. And yet, something about the way he spoke, the certainty in his voice, made it impossible to dismiss outright. By the time morning arrived, she had nearly convinced herself to forget the entire conversation. She had responsibilities, bills to pay, and the last thing she needed was to get swept up in something unpredictable. But when she arrived at Lancaster & Co., reality hit her like a slap. The office was sleek, efficient, and utterly impersonal. Colleagues barely glanced at her, too absorbed in their own tasks to acknowledge the new hire. Her desk was tucked into a corner, stacked with folders and reports she hadn't been briefed on. The woman who had interviewed her passed by without a second glance, and Olivia quickly realized that, beyond the formal offer, she was nothing more than another cog in the machine. By noon, she had gone through endless spreadsheets, each more tedious than the last. There was no creativity, no challenge, just numbers and reports that felt like busy work. A sinking feeling settled in. She had fought so hard for this, but now that she was here, it felt uninspiring. Her phone buzzed on the desk. A message from an unknown number. I assume your first day is as riveting as expected. Olivia didn't need to ask who it was. She stared at the screen, debating whether to respond. Nathaniel had a way of making his presence felt even when he wasn't in the room. Against her better judgment, she typed back, "It's fine." Seconds later, another message. Fine isn't good enough. She exhaled sharply, locking her screen, but the words needled at her for the rest of the day. When her shift ended, she stepped outside, expecting to make the usual trek home. Instead, she found a familiar car parked across the street. The driver's side door opened, and Nathaniel emerged, leaning casually against the frame as if he had all the time in the world. She hesitated, torn between irritation and intrigue. Finally, she crossed the street. "You just happened to be here." Nathaniel's expression was unreadable. "I figured you'd need a ride." Olivia folded her arms. "And why would you assume that?" "Because you don't look like someone who just had a fulfilling first day." She hated that he was right. With a sigh, she climbed into the passenger seat. Nathaniel slid in beside her, starting the engine without a word. They drove in silence for several blocks before he finally spoke. "You already know this isn't where you belong," she frowned. "I just started, and you're already disillusioned." Olivia turned toward him, frustration bubbling up. Not everyone has the freedom to chase opportunities on a whim. "Some of us have to be practical." Nathaniel's grip tightened on the wheel. "You think this is about recklessness, it's about knowing when you're wasting your time." She scoffed. "And you think you know that after one day?" "I knew it the moment you walked into that cafe," he said simply. The certainty in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. They pulled up to a quiet restaurant, nothing flashy but distinctly upscale. Nathaniel stepped out, waiting for her to follow. She hesitated. "What is this?" "Dinner," he said. "And a discussion." She wanted to argue, to tell him she wasn't interested in whatever game he was playing, but a part of her needed answers. Inside, the atmosphere was intimate, the lighting soft, the conversations hushed. Nathaniel led her to a private table near the back. A waiter appeared almost instantly, taking their orders without hesitation. When they were alone again, Nathaniel leaned forward, his gaze locking onto hers. "I want you to walk away from Lancaster & Co." She stiffened. "You can't just expect me to throw everything away because you think you know what's best for me." "I'm not asking you to throw anything away," he corrected. "I'm asking you to invest in yourself, in something bigger." Olivia exhaled, shaking her head. "And what exactly is this company you're acquiring?" Nathaniel studied her for a long moment before answering. "It's a publishing house." Small, struggling, but with the right direction, it could be something extraordinary. She blinked. "Publishing? You have a mind for branding," he said. "And I need someone who can see beyond numbers, someone who understands how to breathe life into something that's been neglected." Olivia hesitated. She had always been drawn to storytelling, to the power of ideas. The thought of helping reshape a company built on creativity was tempting. Nathaniel watched her carefully. "You don't have to decide tonight, but I need an answer soon." The waiter returned with their meals, but Olivia barely touched hers. Nathaniel had planted a seed of doubt. And no matter how much she tried to ignore it, she knew it was already taking root. Olivia sat in the back of the town car, her fingers tapping against her knee as the city blurred past the tinted windows. The invitation from Nathaniel had arrived that morning, formal, understated, and impossible to ignore. A handwritten note had accompanied it. "You're ready for more than spreadsheets. Let's talk." And now, she was on her way to the address he had provided. She had tried to convince herself that she was only going out of curiosity, that she wasn't actually considering leaving her job. But deep down, she knew better. The car pulled up outside a gleaming high-rise downtown, its glass facade reflecting the city lights. A doorman opened the door for her, offering a polite nod as she stepped onto the pristine pavement. She barely had time to take in the sheer luxury of the building before a private elevator whisked her up to the top floor. The doors slid open, revealing a space that was more than just an office. It was a statement. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline, the furnishings sleek and deliberate. Nathaniel stood near the bar, pouring 2 glasses of something dark and expensive. "You came," he said without turning. Olivia stepped inside, the soft click of her heels against the polished floor the only sound. "You knew I would." A faint smirk touched his lips as he handed her a glass. "I was optimistic." She took it, watching him carefully. So, what exactly are we discussing tonight? Nathaniel gestured toward the seating area. Sit, listen. She did, settling onto the leather couch as he took the chair opposite. He leaned forward, forearms resting on his knees, his gaze locked onto hers. The publishing house is called Whitmore and Kane, he began. It was once a leader in independent publishing, innovative, risk-taking. But bad leadership and outdated strategies have left it floundering. Olivia swirled the liquid in her glass, considering, and you think you can fix that? I know I can, Nathaniel said without hesitation. But I need someone who understands how to reshape its public presence, someone who sees opportunity where others see failure. Her fingers tightened around the glass. And you think that's me? I don't think, he said. I know, she shook her head, exhaling slowly. You make everything sound so simple, but it's not. Leaving a stable job, jumping into something this uncertain, it's only uncertain if you doubt yourself, Nathaniel interrupted. Olivia looked at him, searching for any sign of hesitation. She found none. You wouldn't be here if you didn't already know you want this, he said. She hated how right he was. Still, she wasn't ready to concede. And what happens if I say no? Nathaniel sat back, his expression unreadable. Then you go back to spreadsheets and a job that will never challenge you the way this will. She studied him, weighing the risk, the potential, the sheer audacity of it all. And if I say yes, his smirk returned. Then we build something extraordinary. Silence stretched between them, charged and heavy. Olivia exhaled, setting her glass down. You're impossible, Nathaniel stood, extending his hand. I prefer determined. She hesitated for only a moment before clasping it. The deal was sealed. Olivia stood in the elegant office, her hand still warm from shaking Nathaniel's. She had just agreed to something that could either be the best decision of her life or the most reckless. There was no turning back now. Nathaniel walked over to a sleek desk and picked up a black leather folder, handing it to her. This contains the preliminary details of the company's current state financials, marketing strategies, and projections. She took it, her pulse quickening. You came prepared. I don't make offers I haven't thought through, he said smoothly. And I don't bring people in unless I know they can handle it. She flipped open the folder, scanning the first few pages. The numbers were worse than she expected. Whitmore and Kane wasn't just struggling, it was on the brink of collapse. Olivia looked up. This is worse than you let on. Nathaniel didn't flinch. That's why I need you, she exhaled, pressing her fingers against the folder's spine. And what exactly do you expect from me? His gaze was unwavering. A complete rebranding. A strategy that revives interest, draws in new talent, and makes Whitmore and Kane relevant again. She arched a brow. No pressure then. Nathaniel's smirk was brief. I don't work with people who need hand-holding. Olivia closed the folder, her mind already racing with possibilities. I'll need full access to their creative archives, past marketing failures, and any pending projects. You'll have it, Nathaniel assured her. She hesitated, then met his gaze. And if I don't pull this off, his expression darkened, but not with doubt, you will. Something in the way he said it sent a shiver through her. Before she could respond, a sharp knock echoed through the office. The door opened, and a tall man in a charcoal suit strode in. His presence carried the same effortless authority as Nathaniel's, though his demeanor was colder. Nathaniel barely glanced at him. You're late, the man scoffed. Apologies if I don't cater to your impossible schedule. His gaze slid to Olivia, assessing. And you must be the gamble. Olivia stiffened. Olivia Foster. Nathaniel gestured between them. Olivia, this is Adrian Calloway, one of my senior advisors. Adrian crossed his arms. And she's the one you're betting Whitmore and Kane on. Nathaniel's tone sharpened. She's the one who's going to make it work. Olivia met Adrian's gaze without flinching. If you have doubts, I suggest you voice them now. Adrian studied her, his expression unreadable. Then, to her surprise, he smirked. "I like her," Nathaniel exhaled, clearly impatient. "Then let's get to work." The next 48 hours were a whirlwind. Olivia barely had time to process the shift in her life before she was thrown into the deep end. Nathaniel arranged for her to have full access to Whitmore and Kane's headquarters, a once grand publishing house now buried under layers of mismanagement. The offices still held remnants of past success, dusty awards, faded first-edition covers framed along the hallways, but the energy was stagnant, the staff disillusioned. She spent her first day poring through old marketing campaigns, pinpointing where they had lost their audience. Whitmore and Kane had once been known for pushing literary boundaries, but somewhere along the way, they had played it too safe, lost their edge. By the second day, she was meeting department heads, gathering insight into what had gone wrong internally. Nathaniel checked in periodically, watching from the sidelines, letting her take control. By the third night, Olivia found herself in one of the private conference rooms, papers spread across the table, a half-empty cup of coffee beside her. "You look like you're about to tear it all down," Nathaniel's voice came from the doorway. She glanced up, exhausted but determined. "Maybe I am." He stepped inside, rolling up his sleeves. "Good, that means you're thinking the right way." She leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. "They stopped taking risks, that's the problem." Nathaniel nodded, settling into the chair across from her. "And how do we fix it?" Olivia exhaled. "We remind people why they cared about this company in the first place. We reintroduce the boldness they lost." A flicker of approval crossed his face. "How?" she smirked, tapping the papers in front of her. "I have a few ideas." Nathaniel leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "Then let's hear them." For the first time in a long time, Olivia felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The office hummed with a new kind of energy. Olivia could feel it the moment she stepped inside Whitmore and Kane that morning. The stale, resigned atmosphere that had clung to the company like dust was shifting. People were talking more, engaging more. The whispers of uncertainty were slowly being drowned out by something else: possibility. She had spent the last week working tirelessly with the marketing team, restructuring their approach, redefining their audience, and reigniting the company's identity. Late nights had blurred into early mornings, and somewhere in between, she had found herself locked in endless debates with Nathaniel over strategy, vision, and execution. But something else had changed too. The sharp lines between professional and personal had begun to blur, their interactions charged with an unspoken intensity neither of them acknowledged outright. That night, she was still at the office long after most of the staff had gone home. The city lights glowed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, a mesmerizing sea of gold and silver. She was reviewing a proposal when she heard the door open behind her. Nathaniel. He didn't say anything at first, just walked over and placed a cup of coffee beside her before leaning against the desk. He was dressed in his usual crisp attire, though he had loosened his tie at some point, the top button of his shirt undone. "You're still here," he remarked, his voice quieter than usual. "So are you," she countered, stretching her neck. He smirked but didn't argue. Instead, he studied her, something unreadable flickering behind his eyes. "You've done more in a week than they've managed in years." Olivia exhaled, rubbing her temples. "It's not enough yet." "It will be," he said with certainty. She looked up at him, searching his expression. "You always sound so sure of everything." Nathaniel's gaze didn't waver. "I don't invest in things I don't believe in." There was something about the way he said it that sent a warm shiver down her spine. She took a slow sip of the coffee he had brought her, savoring the quiet between them. The usual tension was still there, but it had deepened into something different, something neither of them had fully acknowledged. "You're different here," she observed, setting her cup down. Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. Different how? She studied him. Less calculated, more invested. A flicker of amusement crossed his face. This company matters. Olivia tilted her head. That's not what I meant. His smirk faded just slightly. I know. The silence stretched between them, charged and heavy. Then, without warning, he reached forward and brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, his fingers barely grazing her skin. It was the lightest of touches, but it sent her pulse into a frenzy. She should have pulled away, should have broken the moment before it became something neither of them could take back. But she didn't, because the truth was she didn't want to. Nathaniel let his fingers linger just a second longer before pulling back, his expression unreadable once again. "You should get some rest," he said, pushing off the desk. Her heart was still pounding as she nodded, but as he walked toward the door, she knew something between them had shifted, and there was no going back. The city stretched out beneath them, glittering in the night as Olivia stepped onto the private terrace of Nathaniel's penthouse. The air was crisp, carrying the distant hum of traffic, but up here, it felt like another world. She rested her hands on the cool marble railing, trying to steady herself against the whirlwind of the last few weeks. Behind her, she heard the quiet clink of glass as Nathaniel poured 2 drinks. He was always composed, always in control, but tonight, there was something different about him. He wasn't wearing his usual armor of detachment. Instead, there was a quiet intensity in his gaze, a weight in his presence that made her pulse quicken. He handed her a glass, the liquid inside rich and amber-colored. She took it without question, though her focus remained on him. "You've been quiet tonight," he observed. Olivia exhaled, swirling the drink in her hand. "I've been thinking." Nathaniel leaned against the railing beside her, his gaze steady. "About," she turned to face him fully. "Us." For a moment, the city seemed to disappear, leaving only the space between them. Nathaniel didn't look away, didn't deflect like she half expected him to. "Go on," he said. She hesitated, struggling to find the right words. This started as a chance encounter. A flat tire, a ride into the city. But somewhere along the way it became more than that, and I need to know what that means to you. Nathaniel set his drink down, his expression unreadable. "You already know," she shook her head. "I want to hear you say it." He was silent for a long moment, the weight of the conversation settling between them. Then, finally, he spoke. "The night I stopped on that highway, I wasn't supposed to be there," he admitted. "I had a meeting, one I canceled at the last second. I turned down a road I never take, and then I saw you." Olivia's breath caught. "I don't believe in coincidences," Nathaniel continued, "but I do believe in knowing when something matters. And you, Olivia, matter more than anything I've ever built, bought, or controlled." Her chest tightened, emotions rising too fast to contain. "Nathaniel," he reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. "You changed everything, and I don't want to go back to a life where you're not in it." She searched his face, trying to find any trace of hesitation. There was none. "You mean that?" she whispered. His grip tightened. "I've never been more certain of anything." A warmth spread through her, overwhelming and undeniable. She had spent so long guarding her heart, afraid of chasing something that felt too good to be real. But Nathaniel wasn't just words or grand gestures. He had shown her in 100 little ways that he meant this, and she was done pretending she didn't feel the same. Setting her glass aside, Olivia reached up, threading her fingers through his hair as she pulled him toward her. Nathaniel didn't hesitate. His lips met hers with a slow, deliberate intensity, one that sent a shiver down her spine. This wasn't just a kiss, it was a promise. When they finally pulled apart, Nathaniel rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm against her skin. "You're not getting rid of me now," he murmured. A soft laugh escaped her, filled with something dangerously close to love. "Good, because I don't want to." And just like that, the city faded away, leaving only them. The following evening, Olivia stepped into the grand ballroom of the Whitmore and Kane relaunch event, her breath catching at the sheer spectacle of it. Chandeliers cast a golden glow over the polished marble floors, and the air buzzed with the energy of media executives, literary icons, and industry leaders. It was the culmination of everything they had worked toward, a night that would either solidify the company's revival or prove their efforts had been in vain. Nathaniel stood by the entrance, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, effortlessly commanding the room with his presence. When his eyes found hers, a slow, knowing smile curved his lips. She made her way to him, the soft rustle of her gown barely audible over the murmur of conversation. "You clean up well," she said, tilting her head. He glanced over her, his gaze lingering in a way that sent warmth coursing through her. "You're breathtaking." She felt the compliment settle deep in her chest, but there was no time to dwell on it. The night was just beginning, and there was still so much at stake. As the evening progressed, Olivia navigated conversations with investors, authors, and journalists, each interaction reinforcing the impact of the company's transformation. She fielded questions about the new direction, the bold initiatives, the revitalized brand, everything she had poured her energy into. Nathaniel remained close, stepping in when needed, but mostly watching her with a quiet pride that made her heart race. At one point, Adrian approached, a glass of champagne in hand. "You've officially proved me wrong," he admitted. Olivia arched a brow. "That's a rare admission from you," he smirked. "Don't get used to it." Nathaniel chuckled beside her, an easy camaraderie settling between them. Then, as if sensing the perfect moment, a hush fell over the crowd. One of the senior executives of Whitmore and Kane took the stage, microphone in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying through the room, "tonight is about more than just a relaunch. It's about resurrection. And none of this would have been possible without the vision, determination, and relentless effort of one person, Olivia Foster." A wave of applause erupted, and Olivia felt her breath hitch. She hadn't expected public recognition. She had been so focused on the work itself, on proving to herself that she was capable, that she hadn't stopped to consider just how much she had accomplished. Nathaniel leaned in, his voice a quiet murmur against her ear. "Take it in. You earned this." She swallowed hard, stepping forward as the executive gestured for her to join him. As she took the microphone, she glanced at Nathaniel one last time. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes held something unmistakable: pride, admiration, and something deeper still. Clearing her throat, she turned to the crowd. "I won't take up too much of your time," she began, her voice steadier than she expected. "But I want to say this: Whitmore and Kane was never just about books. It was about stories, about voices that needed to be heard. And tonight, we're not just reviving a company. We're bringing those voices back to life." The applause that followed was deafening. As she stepped down, Nathaniel was waiting for her. The moment she was close enough, he reached out, threading his fingers through hers. "You did it," he said, his voice quieter now, just for her. "We did," she corrected, squeezing his hand. His gaze searched hers, something shifting in his expression. Then, right there in front of everyone, he pulled her in and kissed her. It wasn't just a kiss. It was an acknowledgement, a promise, a declaration. And Olivia knew without a doubt that this was exactly where she was meant to be, with him, with this future, with everything they had built together.